welcome to the Freedom Pact podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you preface this book. I have the quote in front of me here. It says, "To those who understand the power of compassion, and to those open to learn, and to the countless lives that have been harmed or destroyed wherever compassion is ignored." How can a life be destroyed in this way, and what do you mean by that preface?
Well, when you're writing something like that, you have an infinite number of directions one can go. And having already written most of the copy of the book, I started to feel a need to thank those who are acting with great compassion, as we can see in COVID right now, and how first responders and people in the direct lines are sacrificing themselves to help others. But then I started to think about all of the pain and suffering that has occurred, I guess, since pre-recorded history, of those who were on the wrong end of those who held no connection to others, and inflicted pain. I mean, maybe it's not the most recent, but certainly World War II, and the Holocaust, and the millions of lives that it cost is a pretty strong indicator of those who were on the wrong end and not receiving compassion.
Before we dive into some of the content, I just wonder, are there any personal reasons that you decided to write this book?
Well, Lewis, yes, I've been working with men almost exclusively as a psychologist for many years, and I have seen profound compassion come out of men. And my own father was a compassionate man, although he was a very traditional kind of man. He served in World War II. He was on Guadalcanal, and I feel like he may have, but I never left that island. Although I've never been there. The suffering that he went through, and the impact, particularly in post-traumatic stress disorder, impacted my life directly. And I think sometimes we learn through our own pain and suffering the value of compassion towards others. Now, I'm not complaining. I've led a good life, but I think that sensitivity towards others is why I became a psychologist. In fact, I spent my first 2 years in high school in the Catholic seminary, so something stirring inside of me that wanted to be of service.
A stat that jumped out to me in the book is 60% of men surveyed said society puts pressure on men to behave in a way that is unhealthy or bad. And this idea of confined masculinity, what is that, if you could define it to our audience, and what are some examples of it that they might recognize?
Confined masculinity is a socially learned set of rules that you as a man and I as a man and every man walking the planet is taught without somebody sitting down with us saying, "Now let me teach you the rules of being a man." But some of those rules that we pick up are things like don't be vulnerable, don't express your feelings, or if you do, be cautious because you are vulnerable and somebody may take advantage of that. Certainly misogyny, or our attitude towards women, and looking at women as objects and as conquests. Achievement, do whatever you can to get to the top. If you hurt somebody along the way, that's the rules of the game. It has to do with intimacy. Don't express strong intimacy, or if you do it dominantly through your sexual expression. and be stoic. Don't complain. Don't talk about your feelings. Keep them secret. If you're in pain, grin and bear it. It doesn't mean every man learns this the same way, but it means that we're all exposed to it. And part of our adult responsibility is to throw out some of those rules that absolutely don't work and keep those that do, and modify the rest. So confined masculinity is being imprisoned in a sense, or contained within those very limiting ideas of what it means to have a masculine role in the world.
I think one of the biggest examples that stick out to me is this idea of vulnerability, because I think, for me at least, it's been extremely important for me in developing friendships. Even with my best male friends, my best friend who is also male, who I run this podcast with, I think our friendship really went to new heights when we started having really open and vulnerable conversations with each other. And I think that is, extremely important. So that is one of the ones that, this confined masculinity rules that are probably most detrimental, in my opinion. For you, what are some of the confined masculinity rules that you believe are most detrimental to us as men?
Well, certainly the ones about the expression of feeling. It took me a couple of relationships to figure that one out. That not being vulnerable or being expressive of what's going on inside, and not necessarily just bad feelings. I mean, if we cut off the bad feelings, we often cut off the elated and strong positive feelings, and think that we're supposed to operate somewhere in the middle. So just like many other men, I found out that when the more intimate I'm willing to be, typically the stronger the relationship is. My wife and I feel, are extremely intimate in ways that are in a glance, in a touch, in a whisper in the ear, in a look across the room, in what we say to each other and whisper in each other's ears that are deeply personal, and being unafraid to do that, or to even hold hands in public. Some men are very uncomfortable holding hands in public, walking down the street. I was once hugging my wife on the street, and a police officer came by and told us to stop.
Why did you do that?
Because something was going on with him, that I was not privy to, but it was. I felt bad for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Another term that crops up a lot in this book is liberating masculinity. What do you mean by that?
Well, that in a nutshell is breaking free of those confined ideas. A liberating masculinity, really, I sometimes describe it as a tailor-made masculinity for oneself, where you don't subscribe to the traditional rules, yet you go through particularly your adult male life, in a way that feels very authentic to you and feels very real. Like this is why I'm here. This is my purpose. I'm moving towards my fulfillment. I'm feeling happy, or happier, or I'm feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. And so when we are moving towards a liberating masculinity, we're often, by trial and error, letting go of notions that simply don't work in human relationships.
So in the book, let's talk about reinventing masculinity. You mentioned the 5 C's framework. The first being curiosity, asking important questions. What do you think are the kinds of questions that we should be asking ourselves that we tend to often neglect or we are taught to neglect?
Mm. Well, I think the curiosity or the question asking primarily starts with awareness that we're allowed to ask questions about how am I operating as a man? Is this working well for me? Am I getting a good response from others? Is it deepening my relationship? Relationships often have to grow down as well as grow up, and growing down means developing deeper roots and connections and involvements and feeling stronger in the substance and structure of a relationship. And the deeper our roots go, the stronger the tree or the tree of life, our own personal life, can withstand difficulties and storms. So the first thing about curiosity is knowing that we can ask those questions, that we don't have to blindly follow those silly male rules. I call them silly male rules. And questions such as, is this working? Do I need to operate automatically in this way? If people are telling you that you are, they don't know you, or they want more disclosure from you, or they feel lonely with you, believe them. Maybe they want more. It's asking the question, what is it they want from me? How can I learn to do that?
Just another segue for you personally, what have you noticed that there seems to be a different approach or a different feeling towards masculinity maybe now than it did 10, 20, 30 years ago? Is it moving in the right direction, or ultimately is that why you've written this book? Is it not moving in the right direction yet?
Well, it certainly isn't binary, Lewis. I think first of all that there are some very good signs that younger men are more tolerant, more expressive, more nurturing, more involved in fathering, more involved in their ability to accept emotions. There's a lot of evidence showing that the workplace for men, younger men, needs to be more comprehensive to their life and to their adaptation to their fuller life. In other words, the dedication to the business is no longer, I think, are going to be a sustainable model. So yes, there are very healthy signs, and the data supports some of those very healthy signs. But I always caution people not to get too optimistic, because the power of those confined ideas are strong and alive, and we see them sort of coming out in various movements. In the U.S., we see that with the rise of Nazi movements, the rise of anti-racial groups, and I don't think the U.S. is alone in that by any stretch of the imagination. So something is going on there that is rooted in confined masculinity ideas.
The second C you mentioned in this framework is courage. Now, on the surface, if you look at that word as a man, you think it means be brave, suck it up, get on with it, push through it. But when we dig deeper, what do you mean by courage, and what kind of courage should we be looking to harness?
Yeah, that's a good question. And some of those examples you gave are very workable. And we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. It takes a lot of courage, for example, for a man to wake up in the morning, to go to a job, to support his family, and doing a job he may not really find a lot of satisfaction to do. And so the courage that I see from men has ranged from a daily sacrifice of their best hours of their day in order to make sure their kids are more fully supported educationally than they've ever been, or have food and clothing and so on. So when I watch men, I see a great deal of courage all over the place. Certainly, men who are in high-risk jobs display a certain kind of physical courage. What I'm talking about here has a lot to do with emotional courage. Emotional courage, the emotional courage to see your son, say, fall down during your 8-year-old son fall down while he's playing soccer, and he starts to tear up, and instead of saying to him, grin and bear it or ignore it, just saying something like, oh, that must hurt, but the hurt's going to go away. And something that comforts, something that doesn't tell him that his actual feeling at that moment is wrong. It takes courage to step out of that traditional confined role to be expressive and to react to people in ways that one typically does not. So it's out of a comfort zone that a lot of the courage comes in. Does that make is that clear?
While we're on that subject, just another segue. What role do you think that this taught idea of masculinity is playing in the relationships that people have with their children, that people have with their families? Is it causing a bit of a divide that necessarily doesn't need to be there?
Absolutely. I mean, confined masculinity, by definition, is restrictive. So if I haven't met a man yet that has said to me, my father told me too many times that he loved me. No one's ever walked in my office with that as a complaint or an issue, but a lot of men have said, gee, I know my dad loved me, but I never heard it. Or he certainly acted in loving ways, but we never hugged. We were very uncomfortable touching until perhaps late in life when the father's death is approaching. So that, yes, it interferes because it's unfulfilled. It's not tying together all of the different stitches with each other to create a tight fit where the behavior and the words and the actions and the language and the nonverbals and the verbals are conveying the kind of warmth and comfort and tenderness that we often need. It's not all we need, but when those are missing, we feel it. We hurt.
Yeah, that reminds me. I was talking to John Assaraf, who one of the authors of The Secret. He's a neuroscientist, and he was talking about the relationship he had with his father, and that his father was very distant, would often beat him, would never show any compassion. And when he eventually asked his father later in life, why did you do this? He said, well, that's what my father's father did, and that's what my father's father's father did. And John was telling me that it got to this point where he thought, I have to be the one to break the cycle. I've got to be the one to step up. And so is that what we mean by courage? Somewhere down that line, if we're talking about parenting, someone's got to have the courage to go, okay, let me look at this from another angle.
Bingo! You win what's behind curtain number 3 with that answer. That's exactly a great example of the kind of courage, that the emotional courage that we're talking about. And these kinds of things are generationally transmitted. And that's, in that example, you could see great grandfather, grandfather, their father, and at some point the courage to say, well, that didn't help me, certainly didn't help my dad, and I don't think my dad was helped by it. So is there a better way? Now we're back to curiosity. So because these are very intertwined and looping. And a better way tends to be a more compassionate, connected, involved, non-confined masculinity way.
The next C, a word we've mentioned numerous times already, compassion. And so I Googled the word compassion, and Google said it is sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. Now, for me, developing compassion has to start within. I guess you've got to develop self-compassion. So what are the tools, what are the ways we can start to develop this self-compassion?
Self-compassion. When I do workshops with men and I ask, how many of you feel you're compassionate? Most men will raise their hand. If I ask them, how many of you feel self-compassionate? I get looks like, I don't even know what you're talking about, let alone raising of a hand. In the men's group center that Men Mentoring Men that I started many years ago, there's a sign that says, I never beat myself up gently. And self-compassion is recognizing one's own suffering. And by suffering, I'm talking about, it could be discomfort, it could be a recurring anxiety about something in your life. It could be something that feels like you want to avoid. It could feel hurt, like an emotional hurt. Certainly it could be a physical hurt as well. Data shows men don't take care of themselves physically very well, certainly not as well as women do. So self-compassion is attached to self-awareness. And when you're self-aware enough to know that you're hurting, then you can recognize that being self-compassionate is doing something to alleviate or prevent that suffering from happening. It's like being your own best friend in some kind of way. It's not self-pity, nor is it non-courageous. It takes courage to see that you're suffering, to admit to it. You know why? Because it shows vulnerability again.
Yeah. When you say that with compassion with others, you say in the book that it doesn't just stop at empathy, it requires action. What kind of action do you mean?
That's another good question. I was asked that after a workshop once, and like, what's the difference between empathy and compassion? And I used the example that, Lewis, if you said to me, you broke your leg, and I said, oh, I did once too, that must really hurt, and it's really inconvenient. And, it'll cramp your lifestyle for quite a while, and I get it. Well, I'm being empathic. But if I say to you all of those things, that, wow, that must have really hurt, and it's extremely inconvenient. In fact, you're going to have many visits to the doctor, and you're not able to drive. So I'll drive you to the doctor whenever you need somebody to do that. That's an act, and that's an act of compassion. So it's taking the empathy to a step of action that either prevents or eliminates the suffering that is going on. A simple thing like walking down the street and somebody says, do you have any spare change? and you reach in your pocket and you give them some change. That's an action. That's an act of compassion.
The fourth one you mentioned is connection, and I think it can be extremely liberating and free when you build these bonds with people, and you can start to do things that you otherwise may not have been able to do on your own. What does connection look like in practice in the way that you're referring to it in the book?
Mm-hmm. The way we typically look at connection, Lewis, is, and rightfully so, is an involvement with those around us, our immediate family, our extended family, and our friendships. And those are important connections that by themselves often need to be deepened or explored in a way that increases the amount of information to intimacy that we have inside of that. So I want that to, I want to be sure that that part of connection is a vital part of our lives. When we're talking about connection, we're talking about expanding the ring so that we begin to understand that we're all, in a poetic way, we're all made of stardust. We're all the same. We may have different cultural styles. We may have different skin colors. We may have different ideas about things. But you cut your finger, we're all going to bleed. And so it's a recognition that connection is something beyond kinship. It's something beyond tribal. It includes that, but it goes beyond that. And in another way, connection is relearning the vitalness of our connection with our natural environment. We're killing it. That is not connection. We don't, when you're deeply connected with something, you don't kill it. And we're killing our natural environment, which means we're committing a small form of suicide to the human race and to all living creatures. So when we talk about connection, we're talking about a mindset that goes beyond that which is only me oriented, but becomes me and we oriented. And that includes other people as well as the natural earth and all living creatures.
So when we start to look for more connection in people anyway, should we ask ourselves any questions when we're looking for new connections in people? Are there any certain traits you think we should personally look for in people we're going to bring into our close circle? Are there any traits that you personally try to avoid when you're bringing people into your close circle?
Yes. Well, I'll talk personally. I don't know if there's anyone in my close circle that espouses disconnection and hate, that is so rigid in his or her ideas about life is all about them. That takes me down. So why would I be around somebody who is that self-absorbed? I think that the idea of, for me, people who take care of themselves, take care of those they love, and have a broader perspective of connection, both to other people and to the natural environment, simply makes me feel stronger, makes me feel more alive and more protective of those things, because I'm being supported by my peers. So I think the questions that one asks about who do I include in that larger circle starts first with the recognition that, frankly, we're all in that circle. But there are some folks in that circle that want to diminish the quality of life for themselves and others, and those that want to enhance it. I think the more you and I support people around us to enhance the quality of life, then and we teach it to our children, then it becomes exponential. We're now building a community of people who do that. And I have a certain amount of maybe anger is too strong of a word, but maybe disgust isn't, at the silence men have of these confined rules that we talk about. The lack of speaking up in personal and public ways to say, no, that's I'm not going to operate that way. When we have our men mentoring men meetings and men learn that they could be in the company of other men in a safe environment and not be shamed, then over time they learn that they can express themselves in ways that begin to change the way they see the world, the way they love other people, the way they connect with other people. So the things we espouse in the book are not based on a sort of a tree-hugging theory of life. It's based on the fact that when men are given permission to really, in a sense, let their humanity rip, they grow and they love more deeply, and they are more connected to one another. They are more involved with their families and with their wives, and they make choices about work that are more satisfying. For me personally, nothing could be more gratifying than watching that happen.
It's interesting because I recently spoke to an ancient historian, and we were talking about things like compassion and love, and he was giving me these stories and these examples of his archaeology and when he's visited historical caves, and they found that, they found these stories of like groups of Neanderthals from thousands of years ago, men showing compassion by, they found these burial sites for, Neanderthals that had like one arm, one leg, were blind. So they were pretty much a drain on resources to the group, and they were pretty much useless to, their efforts to survive. Yet they treated these people with such love and compassion, and these were men. So that tells me that it was in your human nature to be compassionate.
Yes.
But somewhere along the line in history, this started going wrong. What changed?
Well, in our foreword, who is written by Dr. Paul Gilbert, who lives somewhere near you in the UK, is one of the leading researchers in the area of compassion. And in the foreword, he does mention exactly what you just talked about. But he suggests that what really changed that built-in instinct to be compassionate was indeed what we refer to as civilization. When we became farmers instead of hunter-gatherers, that we then became territorial. We then became possessive. We then divided the resources. We then created roles for women and roles for men because men were more able, say, to till a field and then a woman. And we started to adapt to this agricultural way of life. And then I wanted your land and you wanted my land, and the rest is history. And so in a paradoxical way, it was the beginning of what we refer to as civilization that may have put a major dent into our ability to be compassionate.
Yeah. The fifth and final C you mentioned in this framework is commitment. Now, like any addiction, like any bad habit, it is, I'm guessing, very, very easy to relapse back into this mold of confined masculinity. Even if, you know, you've read a book like yours or you've listened to a conversation like this and you're trying to actively change that, it's very easy to slip back. That could be through, you know, your social group. It could be a toxic partner. You can quite easily slip back into that mold. In what ways can we be sure to keep ourselves accountable and prevent ourselves slipping back into that toxic mold?
That's a good question. You know, and one of the answers, though, is not to be self-compassionate when you do slip back, because it is going to happen. But the difference is awareness.
Yeah.
Oh, look, you know, I acted like a jerk right there. You know, it's like I'm not going to do that again. Or why did I say that? Or that was unfriendly. Or I didn't pay attention to that person's needs. And so you become aware of it. And that awareness then gradually begins to allow the commitment part to mature. But there's also a heart commitment. It's like it's akin to just saying, as I could say to you right now, I want to become a better man than I am. Now, what does that mean? It means first I'm committed to that, but if I want to be a better man than I am, I'm making a commitment statement, and that means that I have to then define what that means. And for me, that would be more helpful, more available, less self-centered, more curious about other people. In my profession as a psychologist, to stay on top of the literature and the techniques that work with people, to be able to have boundaries, to be able to live a life that is of service. So those are the things that that I would commit to, that in turn I feel, and for me personally, make me a better person, a better man, and then roll back into I have to keep asking questions and be curious. I have to have the courage to confront, et cetera, et cetera.
When I was going through the book, this song kept coming to my head. It's a song, or I know it as a song, through a very famous Welsh singer. Where I'm from Wales. The singer's called Tom Jones, very famous singer. And the song is, he keeps asking a question. He keeps saying, what is the soul of a man? And that begs the question, what is the soul of a man, and how do we embrace it?
Well, I wrote a whole chapter on that. And there are, frankly, many ways one can interpret that. And as I stated in the book, I'm looking at that from a non-religious perspective. And but I'm looking at the soul of a man as the ability to really be deeply and intimately involved in life. So that you see, a lot of men will say, and a lot of women, I mean, this is kind of a human thing to do, but here's the good things that happened to me, and here's the bad things that happened to me. So we have this illusion that if we know enough, do enough, say enough, learn enough, we could make only good things happen, and we could eliminate what we refer to as the bad things. Well, those are all judgments. That's just life. And so when you're deeply in the soul, what you're doing is you're looking at, you're trying to find a way to stay deeply centered no matter what life brings. The Buddhists refer to equanimity. And equanimity is that ability to stay centered despite what life presents. The soul of a man is holding hands with a dying parent. The soul of a man is exhibited when he walks into a room and his children are sleeping and he sneaks over and kisses them on the forehead. The soul of a man is there when he apologizes to his wife for having said something or done something that hurt her feelings. The soul of a man is present when he could say to another man, I love you. The soul of a man is present when he is able to create, to be involved in the wonders of life, to take a walk and actually see what's around you instead of just walk, to absorb. It's kind of an absorption of life, and it's an absorption that isn't determined by this is good or this is bad. In New Jersey here, and it's a beautiful time of year in the fall. It would be like if I took a walk down a path and said, this orange leaf is ugly, this red leaf is beautiful. I'm making a judgment. It's just orange, one's orange and one's red. To be soulful is to look at the beauty of both and the wonder of both, and frankly, the miracle of both. Someone asked me the other day, do you believe in miracles? And the question startled me, and I said, where isn't there a miracle? I mean, if you look at it that way, it's like everything, our presence, you and I being able to talk to each other like this. It's infinite.
Beautiful, beautiful. Look, we've talked a lot today about your book, Reinventing Masculinity, the liberating power of compassion and connection. What I know our audience would love to hear from you. Are there any books that you've read throughout your life that have had a big impact on you that you could recommend they check out as well?
Wow. That's a tall question, not because I haven't read a lot of books that have been influential, but it's trying to remember them that's going to be the problem. Certainly, I've been influenced by the books of Paul Gilbert. I would highly recommend Paul's books. His most recent one is called Living Like Crazy. And he's not talking about letting it rip. He's really understanding the human mind as still evolving. And I mean, what other living creature can create a stockpile of bombs that can destroy everything on the planet? It's crazy. We do crazy things to each other. So he tries to explain that while at the same time explaining the necessity and the sort of built-in equipment we have to counter that, which focuses on compassion. I have been heavily influenced by a psychologist by the name of James Hillman. Hillman passed away a number of years ago, but he's considered the father of American archetypal psychology. He was a Jungian, and but he talked about the dimensionality, as I do in the book, of a man, that we are multitudes, as the poem goes, and that Hillman really talks about the necessity to be inside our imaginations, our imagination of the world, and to stop this silly binary thinking, good, bad, right, wrong, heaven, hell, and because we miss all of life in between, which is where all of life typically is. And I have a prior book to this one that I wrote that and illustrated. I'm also a professional artist, which we're not talking about today, but that book is called Becoming a Happier Man. I'll hold it up so you can see it. A Man's Guide to Living a Full and Meaningful Life. And in this book, it's very small copy, are both things that I've learned. For example, this one is about deep friendships.
Wow.
That things I've learned from men over the years with men mentoring men, that when men are happier, they report that these things exist in their lives. And in this random page I picked up, it says, develop deep friendships, share things of importance, what you feel, what you believe, what you experience, and what you need from each other. And then the illustrations are done to give a different avenue of absorbing the words. I have, between my wife and I, my wife's book, frankly, has been very influential because we talked that through. It's in its 5th printing. It's a book that describes, it's called The Art of the Question. Okay. And it's published by Barrett Kohler. And she talks about the difference between learner and judger. So, for example, questions are very interesting. What we're doing right now, or what we're wearing right now, really are answers. It's like, what's comfortable? How do I want to present myself to the public? What's clean? What do I look good in? And so we have implied questions where our actions really can be reverse engineered to the questions that we were asking. And contrast that with judgment, which is could be personal, like, why did this always happen to me? Or why can't things be better? Or they could be more cultural, like, why does everything have to be so angry? And why does so-and-so have to be president? And but learner questions teach us to wonder. They teach us to be in a mindset like, what can I learn from this? I made a mistake, but what can I learn? What's possible? What opportunities does this create? So those are a few books that I would recommend.
Fascinating. I do really want to check out your previous work and your wife's work, so I'll definitely check those out when I get a chance. My penultimate question to you. So if we picture a scenario now in which every person on the planet is tuned into the same frequency, and you were given the opportunity to broadcast one short message or one lesson that you've learned, if you distill your experiences and research in life down, one thing you'd love every person in the world to hear, what would your message to the world be?
Whoa. Simply put, let's care for each other, and let's care for the natural world.
Love it. Love it. My last question to you. So I'll give you an example. For me, what makes my life worth living every day is recording conversations like these and putting them out there, and knowing that, even if one person listens and it impacts their life, then that means I can go to sleep at night happy. So for you, Dr. Adams, what makes a life worth living?
My personal philosophy is to do 3 things. Well, it includes more things. To do good, to have fun, and to make money. If I make money, I could do more good. I could have more fun. It loops around. It isn't about the money itself. It's the resources that it provides. It's the ability to impact a wider connection that I was talking about earlier. On a very personal level, you know, I have spent countless hours listening to a lot of suffering as a psychologist. I have spent also many hours laughing with people, seeing the absurdities of life. And I've had the joys of seeing people really change in a way that allowed them to grow up and down and to feel more satisfied about life. One of my patients said to me the other day, I got the audio portion of your book and I'm listening to it in my car. He said, I'm really enjoying it. He said, but it feels like you're talking to me. Yeah. And so I'm a voice in his head from our therapy, but also through the book. And so it's touching his life. I guess that's what I'm talking about is positively touching other people's lives.
So for everyone listening now who may want to check out the book and buy it and read it themselves, where can they find out more about it? Where can they purchase it? And where can they find out more about you and your work?
Okay. The website for the book is reinventingmasculinity.com. On that website, we have some stories. We have some additional information. We have links to menmentoringmen.org, which is a nonprofit organization of a 30-year-old men's group. We have the ability to purchase the book on there by clicking on to Amazon, and that's where one can order the book, or through your local bookstore. Which and also like Barnes and Nobles, so on and so forth. You could also go to dredadams.net. That's DREDADAMS .net. As one of my patients pointed out, it's actually spells dreadadams.net. So it's an easier way to remember it, and hopefully there's no dread to it except for the initial phone call people typically make. Then they're dreading that. The website reinventingmasculinity.com I think is perhaps the most informative one that people can connect with.
Perfect. So the call to action for this episode being reinventingmasculinity.com. Dr. Ed Adams, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's put a real smile on my face. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
I did, Lewis, very much. You asked some great questions, and I could tell you're a good man.